Hello and welcome to Just Films and That with me, Josh Hallam.
And me, Alice Oliver. This is the podcast where we talk about films that we think are underrated, underappreciated, or we just wanted to talk about them.
We're also going to get stuck into some classic films that one of us maybe hasn't seen, and maybe throw in some great guests along the way. So, we start each week, as we always do, with a random question to get us going. Alice, is there a genre of music that, for whatever reason, you just do not like?
Interesting. You know what? I feel like I am one of these people that say, like, oh, I love all music or whatever. But I genuinely can, like, I really do see a lot of value in many different genres of music. And I wouldn't say that, like, you can't really judge that one is better than the other when they're offering such different things. But having said that, I think the one kind of music I would never opt to listen to is that like really aggressive screamo, like really like screaming your throat raw sort of down the microphone sort of thing. Like I completely get that that's like really cathartic and a lot of people really connect to it. But for me, it's just, I've got tinnitus as well. So it's like just not that much of a pleasant sound for me. I like some soft, classic dad rock myself. Why? Which one? Is there one that you just can't listen to?
I mean, it's exactly like what you're saying, which is everything is subjective. So it doesn't really matter what either of us say. Yeah, I wouldn't particularly listen to screamo. I'm not a huge fan of like really heavy anything, like really heavy rap or really heavy hip hop, if that's a thing. So yeah, I'd probably say the same as you, like screamo or really like heavy dance music, like dubstep.
Oh yeah, like really
again,
on the dance floor, off your head sort of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean every type of music obviously has a skill, but I just don't. Yeah, it's just not for me, shall we say?
Yeah.
So we'll move on to talking about this week's film, which is picked by yourself, Alice, and it is Meet Me in St. Louis. So obviously spoiler warning for this, but it is almost 80 years old, over 80 years old. So,
many decades old.
Yeah, if you've not had a chance to catch up with it, then I am sorry, but we're going to spoil it for you. So, Alice, first of all, let's commit. So, is it Meet Me in St. Louis? Is it Meet Me in St. Louis? Let's go early. Let's commit. What are we going with?
Gosh, I mean, who are we to say? Really, it's
nobody.
So I would have thought St. Louis, but I guess the people that live there say St. Louis, and if they're the ones living there, but no, I don't know. I came away from the film still not truly knowing the answer to that.
Let's say St. Louis because it's probably something to do with the French king, right?
I would say St. Louis. That's how I read it when I read it. And the song, so they do sing Meet Me in St. Louis. It's usually just when they're speaking that it's St. Louis.
Let's go St. Louis. So I'm intrigued. This is the first of our classic films that we've done. So why did you pick it and what's it about?
So a bit of a strange one, I suppose, as to why I picked it. But I was watching Lovecraft Country. There was a scene in which one of the characters was watching Meet Me in St. Louis on this big screen. I didn't know that it was Meet Me in St. Louis at the time, but I just saw this huge image of Judy Garland on the screen. And I just thought, gosh, I really don't know that much about Judy Garland. I realized I'd only seen Wizard of Oz that she'd been in. And I was like, she was such a, huge part of the culture of American life back then and of the cinema. It seemed criminal that I hadn't seen any more films with her in. So I thought, right, I'll pick that one. So I hadn't seen it before. I suppose I hadn't really heard of it. Obviously, I'd heard the song, but I suppose hadn't really realised that it was tied to a film. So it follows the story of the Smith family. So we've got, mum and dad, 2, 3 daughters, 4 daughters, quite many kids. And they're, sort of leading this idyllic life in suburbia, and everything's just sort of nice and secure and comfortable. And the young daughters who live in the house, they've got love interests, and we follow their stories and their relationships as they get to know these boys. and you follow the parents and you kind of see a bit about their relationship, and you see how the father is, very work centric. The family obviously rely on him financially, but he lets his need to either be successful or to be financially successful, at least, sort of overcome his more like family duties, and the sort of the wife and the kids sort of start to feel neglected, and he wants to move them off to New York. But in the end, everything sort of works out. The girls get their men, they decide to stay in St. Louis, and the World's Fair is coming to town, which is sort of talked about as if it's like the most monumental, sort of wonderful thing that's ever happened. Like they can't get over that the World's Fair is coming to their town. They really pushed that, didn't they? I wonder if people do or did behave like that. I mean, with the World's Fair, like it's such a strange thing.
It's a strange one, isn't it? Yeah, it's a strange, because also it's made in the 40s, isn't it?
44, yeah.
1944, but it's set in 1903. Mm-hmm. So suppose they would be excited because it's kind of before all of the stuff that everyone knows happened in the coming decades, the war and the Depression and all that. So it is a kind of turn of the century, look into the future, scientific marvel type thing. So I don't know. I'd be interested to know how excited people were at the time, or if they just made it as a kind of as a device in the film. I'd be interested to know that.
It's sort of just this nice family story. They are like, the poster family of what about, the American dream is meant to signify, and, the successful man and the dutiful wife, and, the sort of kind of well-behaved kids, I suppose. But we do see them get up to some antics, which did provide a lot of comedy in the film, which I quite enjoyed. But anyway, Josh, had you seen this?
No, I hadn't. I'd obviously heard of it because it's a very, very famous film, but other than hearing about it and knowing Judy Garland was in it, I knew nothing about it. So I was really interested to go in watching it, because I find older films can kind of be 50-50 for me. Sometimes I really enjoy them. Like Citizen Kane, for example, is a film I really enjoy. I can see why it's such a masterpiece. But then other times I can find them a little dated, a little boring. They're made for an audience who are obviously vastly different to us, 70, 80 years later. So I was really interested to go in and kind of and see how it had aged. I'm also not I'm not a big musicals guy. So I like some musicals, but I quite often find myself a little cold on your massive classic orchestral, what you think of as your really big Broadway old classic musicals. So I'm not massive on things like West Side Story or South Pacific, but then at the same time I do quite like The Sound of Music. So I don't know, maybe it's just each one has to be taken on its own merits. So I was very interested to see how it aged and if I could take to it. So that being said, what did you think?
So it's interesting when you're watching a film that's that old, because you sort of have to watch it in a different way. And I would describe the viewing experience as more sort of interesting than entertaining, because, the story is not particularly gripping, but, we're looking at an industry that is just coming to grips with cinema. It was such an era of discovery. And we were just kind of figuring out things about, lighting and sound. And so you watch it with sort of awe as well, because it's like, here's some of the first and some of the most significant cinema of our time.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you say that, because if you think of it, if this is 1944, cinema is, it's not even 50 years old at this point. Certainly large scale entertainment cinema isn't 50 years old. So it's difficult when you do a film like this, it's difficult to look at it with what we know now. It's difficult to look at it through the eyes of someone living in 2020 who, is almost like spoilt for choice, because back in the day, you went and watched what you went and watched, and that was kind of it, So it is interesting, and it's difficult sometimes, especially when judging a film and how it's aged, to turn that cynicism and that, not political correctness, because it's not really that kind of film, but almost some of the archetypes, the stock characters in there, it is very the women are women and the men are men, and the dad goes to work and there's a maid and the mum's the mum and the girls are all about marrying men, and all that sort of stuff. It definitely doesn't pass the Bechdel test.
The what, sorry? The what test?
So the Bechdel test, and I'm no expert in this, but I believe it's something along the lines of 2 female characters are shown on screen talking about anything other than a man.
Right. Yes. That rings a bell. That rings a bell now that you've explained it to me, Josh. Thank you.
So, and I think that's probably, you're probably going to have to extend that to adult female characters, because there are children in this who definitely don't talk about men. But yeah, so it's interesting when you're looking at that, because it's difficult to switch that little thing, that little voice in your head that's kind of there to go, well, what about that? What about that? So switching that off, I mean, I did quite enjoy it. It's certainly very charming. It's very warm. It's very sweet. You can see it's just there to be a big musical, and it's there for kind of all the family to enjoy. It looks incredible. Like, the sets look incredible. The costumes, I mean, the dresses and the suits, because even for the time, you've got to remember, I suppose, it's a period piece in the 40s. Because it's set, it's like setting something in the 70s now, like Mindhunter or something like that. So they're using period costumes, so it looks incredible. I quite liked some of the songs as well. I had no idea. I don't know about you. I had no idea that "Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas" was from this. I had no idea that. I knew the trolley song, but I knew it probably from the fact that it's just been kind of absorbed into culture. I think I know it from The Simpsons. I think the character sings it in that, the sing, 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 am I happy? That one.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like a lot of this film was familiar to me because of reference, because of seeing things in, like you say, Simpsons, Family Guy, like they're always referencing this like classic media. That was the same way I sort of learned about Star Wars as well, was through Family Guy. But then obviously Family Guy do all that shit with Star Wars. It's like you've seen it. So then when you do see it, it feels familiar. So yeah, the trolley song was great. Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas. Meet Me in St. Louis, of course. And there was one as well where they were dancing at the ball at the Smiths' house. The music was big, wasn't it? It was like big music.
It's like a stage musical. It's big. You can see it's just like you say. It's a huge scale thing in terms of everything's real, and you definitely get that kind of authentic feel from it, I think.
Mm-hmm. Also, did you notice, actually, the very early use of green screen? When Neely and the young Tootie are in the... what is he? Is he a milkman? Is he in a milk cart? Or is he on top of the horse? It's the
kind of classic projection screens, isn't it? Which is like so that was like the precursor to green screen, I think. So they would project an image behind them, and then they kind of sit in front of it, moving up and down as if they're moving along the road. And it gives the perception the car or cart or tram or train or whatever it is going along. That projection technology, like you say, it's really interesting. That's how you're watching an older film as well, isn't it? When it's like someone who's clearly not going anywhere, but they're doing the kind of Ace Ventura, sitting in the car, bouncing up and down.
Oh yeah,
in the background.
An iconic image, and I just love sort of seeing that old technology. Something else I noticed as well, but and this might not have been anything, might be paying too much attention, I don't know, but it was just something really small. But in some of the opening scenes, so we're getting a lot. The maid is trying to make this tomato ketchup to make it smell good, and sort of a lot of the action is taking place in the kitchen and whatnot. And one of the maids, she's laying the table or something, and she sort of slams a spoon down, and it like bounces all the wrong way, and it was just kind of like clearly an accident. And I was just like thinking, yeah, but if you did an accident back then, you can't just retake like that, can you? Think about how the film reel works and how expensive every bit of film is. It's not like today where you just go for 1,000,001 takes, is it?
Yeah.
And I suppose that really adds to that sort of thing, like you were saying about it being a musical, about it feeling live and about it feeling like it's sort of going on in front of you. I found the script and sort of some of the scenarios and the way the scenes were laid out very much like a theatre production, almost like a pantomime. Like each was sort of like nice and boxed off one after another.
Yeah.
It's kind of like watching a series of tableaus, just these images that are trying to conjure up these feelings. So you get sort of some great moments in the dining room scene where they're all gathering around for dinner. They've been waiting for Dad to come home, but he wanted to have dinner at 6:30, and they want to have it at 5:30, and it's all really dramatic. And, they have a little bit of a row. And the eldest daughter, Rose, I believe, yes. So Rose is awaiting a long distance phone call from a young man in New York who's promised to phone her. And Esther, who is Julie Garland's character, keeps saying, he's going to propose. He's going to propose. She's waiting for a long distance call from New York because he's going to propose. And it becomes like this running thing where almost every member of the family says that sequence of words sort of one after another. And that just kind of made it feel very theatrical, but was also quite funny as well. And I did think you did get some moments of really quite nice comedy, I suppose.
No, you're absolutely right. That kind of technique of repeating lines, so every character coming in and tasting the ketchup and it's saying it's too something, it's too sour, it's too sweet or whatever. That is a very classic playwriting technique of characters entering the scene and leaving again. So you really can tell it's been rehearsed this within an inch of its life. Like every dancer, every performer knows their place, and it's very much a product of that time. I mean, things like that are now, but these were the real, these were the real torchbearers of this kind of big scale, lots of cast members, lots of crew members type productions, and you can really see where the work comes into. It's like you say about the rehearsal. You couldn't cock stuff up. That's why it makes things like big dance scenes. I'm just in awe of anyone who can choreograph and direct that level of an amount of people. Or when you look at something like Chaplin or Buster Keaton, and they're swinging off stuff and things are falling at the right time, and they're kind of doing these pratfalls and these big farcical pieces, and every stunt is exactly timed. I just think it's a real marvel of filmmaking. That's one of the things I really love is, looking at stuff, and even now looking at stuff from that long ago and being like, that's really impressive.
Oh, yeah, certainly. This is why it becomes more of it's like a fact-finding thing, or it's like you're sort of investigating. It's like, right, how would they have done this 100 years ago? Or how would they have done this 80 years ago? And then you think about being the camera guy on that day, and it's just like, what? Like, how massive would the camera have been? How many people have you got setting it up? And you just kind of, because we know what sort of productions look like now, because we see it all the time. Like, it's in the news all the time. They'll show you a set, they've been filming in Liverpool and stuff. Like, you see it, you see how it's all made. But you kind of don't have that same image of early cinema. And I just always imagine just so much equipment, like so much.
So it's interesting, like you said earlier. So you picked this because you've not seen much of Judy Garland, and you know what a massive star she was in terms of the history of cinema. And I'm like you. So I'd seen her in The Wizard of Oz. I knew a little bit. I knew she was Liza Minnelli's mum. I knew a little bit about the fact that she was, very poorly treated as a very young person, and that kind of led on to quite a sad, life and stuff. And I knew little bits of that, but I'd never seen her in anything other than Wizard of Oz. So I was quite interested to see her. And I think you can really see that she had that star quality and that star power. She's very much an America's sweetheart, butter wouldn't melt type. She gives this amazingly, wide-eyed performance where you're seeing a kind of coy reactions to everything. Add to that the fact that she has this incredible singing voice, and she really does. I mean, obviously, I knew that she did, but seeing that range from The Wizard of Oz through to this, and knowing what incredible singing voice she had, and I didn't actually know until I saw this how little she was. So she was only 4'11". She was tiny, which I know that I don't know how much of a difference that makes in terms of how good someone's singing is, but you can see why she was this kind of childlike, wide-eyed figure. I mean, what did you think? What did you think? Did she almost, I suppose what I'm trying to say is, did she live up to expectations of this America's sweetheart type character?
I certainly think so. And I just felt something when I saw her on screen as well. Like you say, she is one of the most significant sort of people now in our cinematic history, sort of as far as cinema has existed, I imagine all over the world. So it was so nice to see her. And I mean, she's beautiful, like absolutely beautiful woman. Like I just found her absolutely striking. And her singing voice was gorgeous, and not knowing that Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas was in it, when she sang right at the end, like, oh, it got me in my core. I don't know if it's because we've been having like a bit of a weird year because of everything.
Yeah,
with
well, yeah,
coronavirus
definitely.
and that. But I suppose I hadn't really, I just hadn't taken a minute to sit and process or whatever. And it was just like, there she was in the window singing. And it was so, like, it just kind of filled you with nostalgia as well. And I feel like that's definitely obviously something that the film is going for. It's trying to remind you of a time, whether it was real or not, in 1903 America. I'm sure it wasn't, but that everything was perfect, pre-depression, pre-war. But obviously it wasn't. The films are there to kind of make you think, oh, remember when things were good? Yeah, things could maybe be like that again someday.
Yeah, it's very warm washed, isn't it? It's not, I mean, it's there to entertain. It's not trying to deal with any socio-political points of the time. But like you say, it's very much just like everything's lovely, like everywhere's really like so clean. Like there's just no issues of any kind. But like I said, it's not there to deal with anything like that. Whether you do or do not like that, it's there to just entertain and for you to enjoy the big sets and lovely costumes. And like you say, Judy Garland being this kind of pretty doll-like character with an amazing singing voice, because it's a slightly different performance to Wizard of Oz, because although she's still very young and it's not that long after the Wizard of Oz, she's a bit more mature. She's very much like pretty much a child in the Wizard of Oz. And in this, she's kind of, an adult on the cusp of adulthood, if you like. So I thought it was really interesting because back to what we were saying about the script, she really holds her own with some experienced character actors in there. And the script's it's got some really funny moments, but also some stuff in there for her, like, she has to really go for her love interest, because her love interest, her little sister, sorry, not her daughter, tells her that her love interest either hit her or pushed her or something. And she goes around and kind of confronts him. And it's very much that trope of the time of, you can tell she's actually doing it. It's that old adage of, we're only doing it once, just hit me. It's like John Cleese always used to say to Andrew Saxo, for God's sake, we're not doing this every night. Just get it done. Again, quite a brutal way of looking at it, but it certainly shows in terms of how good it looks. And she really does. She does go for it, and she does, I think, hold her own with the other characters on the screen. She's also very funny. A lot of the lines aren't really there for her to be funny, but they're kind of given to the dad and the other characters. But she really does, for someone who at the time was so young, and knowing now that we know she was quite mistreated several years prior, there's a lot on her shoulders, really.
Yeah, certainly. And I think that maybe that was part of the reason why women liked watching her as well, because she does, for all her innocence and that, she does exude a level of confidence. And I think she definitely did in this. Obviously she follows the typical storyline of basically just, when can I get married? But, that's fine, product of the times. But she just doesn't look afraid at any point. She never looks vulnerable. She looks like I suppose she does know what she wants, really, doesn't she? Even though she's so young, she wants the boy next door. That is her absolute mission. And she makes it happen, to be fair. So I suppose in that way, she kind of looks like she's a really, go and get it kind of gal, even if it is just about the boy next door.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. I'd never really thought of it like that. So as much as it is that, like you say, outdated, she just wants to get married and be a wife and, probably a mother kind of storyline. As much as it is that, she also goes and gets him. And she goes out and gets him. And she also does stuff to kind of, there are other characters who, if they're in her way, she's got no issues with either embarrassing them or making sure that she gets what she wants. So she is assertive in that nature.
Yeah, certainly. And most of it's fine, except for when she, starts hitting him, because she really wallops him. Like, she smacks him around the face. Doesn't she bite him as well?
She, I think, yeah, she pretty much KOs him, like.
Yeah, really goes for it. But of course, that's a response to what Tootie said about him throwing her on the tracks. So let's talk about Tootie for a bit. her storyline was just really interesting, and it went away that I just kind of didn't see coming whatsoever, because the bulk of the film is very much about the older daughters, really, isn't it? It's about their love lives, it's what's going on with them. But Tui's too young to have a love life. So what has she got? So it's Halloween. Because I suppose the film really follows a year, doesn't it? Because we start in 1903, and we end up at Christmas in 1904. So in that time, we get Halloween. So Tui goes out, and all the kids are just absolute little hoodlums, like starting fires, throwing flour on people's faces, like ringing people's doorbells. But when they do it, so the ringleader of their, sort of Halloween friend gang is this lad. And he says, like, who are you going to kill? Who are you going to kill? And in reference to throwing flower bombs at them. Is it flower bombs? Yeah, I think it's flower bombs or bags of flour, handfuls of flour. It's flour. It's flour. Yeah. That's what they're flour. But yeah, and they reference, that action as killing someone. And it's all just sort of quite like these kids have got a lot of angst that they want to let out. And you just kind of see this unfold, and you follow her on her little journey.
On her mischief, on her mischievous kind of,
Yeah.
On her up to no good type storyline, isn't it?
Yeah, and it was just a funny little break from what was going on elsewhere. But that was strange, because obviously we're adults, and it's not often that you would have such a kid-heavy scene in a film that has been mostly kind of like for adults. But I suppose it is a family film. You would have wanted people to go to the cinema as a whole family, right, to get max tickets. So you shove that kid scene in there, and then it's something that kids can get excited about as well, just kind of like getting mucky and annoying the adults and stuff. But she, I thought, as a young child actor, a very young child, I thought she did a great job, little Tootie.
So we talked about, what we like. We talked about the performances and the script and the kind of whole feel of the film. Was there anything that you kind of didn't like, bearing in mind what we've already said about looking at it in context, I suppose?
So from a technical point of view, I wouldn't say that there's anything I didn't like. Did the script blow me away? No, but it pretty much made sense, and it was, like you say, charming. I think that's the really apt word for this, really, isn't it? Is charming. So technically, I thought, nothing really, because you can't, like you say, you're looking at it, you have to look at it through different eyes. You can't imagine it with the same standards as today, with the high quality gear that we've got, and how we've streamlined the process in so many ways. Some of the things that it's not that I didn't like about the film, but something that I was obviously made to think about as I watched it was thinking about the time when it was set, when it was made, and the kind of image that it's projecting. So obviously it was made, or released at least, in 1944. So you've got the backdrop there of World War II, America, not long out of a depression. Things probably weren't feeling great, and people, I think, were probably in very hard times. So you've got that, and you think, well, it's great that the cinema was there. The cinema offers escapism. It lets you go somewhere for 2 hours where you can just focus on what's going on in front of you, and you just lose yourself. And so obviously that's great. But when you think about the time period, so we're going from 1903 to 1944, and so much had happened in that time, especially with regards to the Black history in the USA. Obviously, you had the Tulsa riots in the 1920s, and just so much kind of racial tension and violence going on between that. And then you get this film that shows this time in the early 1900s. And obviously everybody is white, and it's a very sort of, you are just like this type A person, and everyone in the film seems to be that way pretty much. And it's just kind of, it's like it's just glorifying the time before a little bit. And it's just, oh, don't you remember how great and shiny and brilliant things were, and how happy everyone felt? And you get that they're trying to sort of convey that as well, with the music. So the music was very interesting. It was always very big, very dramatic music, like where you'd get sort of quite an intimate scene sort of between two of the characters. I know you'd get moments where Esther would be flirting with John. So you get quite sort of, quite tender or nice moments, romantic moments with them. But there's these like massive violins and this huge orchestra playing. So you kind of never get a chance to sort of breathe, I suppose, during the film. You don't get a chance to kind of stop and come down from the high. It just wants you to be on a high all the time. And it's like, here's a song. Here's Judy Garland dancing around a room singing a song. Here's a big piece of music. Here's it ending happily ever after. So you can't punish the film for that, because that's just,
I think you make an interesting point in terms of, okay, we don't want to judge a film too harshly, especially because of how long it's been since it was released. But you also can't ignore, knowing what we know now, that the film is essentially loads of rich white people and loads of subservient white people. So it's interesting that you say that you still kind of can't, we still kind of can't ignore that fact. I agree with what you're saying, I like looking at films in relation to what was going on at the time. So I think it is really interesting that, like you say, around this time when the World War was going on, films were kind of big, massive musicals that kind of didn't really deal with anything. They were just kind of warm and lovely and charming and come in and sit down and have a nice time. And then that goes through, with other films, which we might have mentioned before, stuff like the 50s and when America was dealing with communism, you get a lot of Invasion of the Body Snatchers films. And that's still going on now. There's an argument to say that in a post 9/11 world, there was a lot of superhero films and, one person or a team of people coming to save everybody from the horrible people. So I find that really interesting. That's one of the things I really enjoy about this podcast is that we can look at films now and we can look at what was going on and wonder how things were affected at the time. I'm the same as you. I'm finding it difficult to find stuff that I don't like, that isn't just a product of the time. It is very stock characters, and it is very kind of basic and what the characters want and what the characters needs, but it's not there for that. It's just there to be a big spectacular production, and it's a feast for the eyes, and costumes are great and the music's great. Generically it can be it's a bit all over the place. It's kind of funny, it's a musical, it's a romance, there's bits of a Christmas film in there, but it's not saying it's any one thing. That all those things I've just said, Christmas and romance and musical, they all kind of come under the musical umbrella, I suppose, for me. So I don't really have any problems with it that aren't a product of the time. It's literally one of the worst prop snowmen I've ever seen. There's a bit where they play with snowmen, and it's like they're just polystyrene. They have they have such a clean break. They might as well have cut them in half with a sword. It's incredible. But other than that, if that's all you can say about a film, it's doing pretty well, isn't it?
Yeah, certainly. And I think it does do, I suppose, just what it was designed to do. I suppose for all my cynicism saying, it's like, oh, why would you lie to people and say that things were better back then? But like I said, things were probably pretty grim at the time. So it's just like, listen, I just want to see someone singing and dancing about how great St. Louis is for a couple of hours and to just go over and think about it. And then, then you've got the songs, and it's like, that's part of the entertainment, and it can be like, people would get the song stuck in their head and that. And I'm sure that's always a nice feeling when you see a musical and you just become obsessed with the music. But no, I think it looked lovely, didn't it? It really did look great.
And sounded lovely,
fantastic and vivid, and but like you say, it's very formulaic, I suppose. It was just kind of like, here's the beginning, here's the middle, here's the end, here's your sort of archetype characters. This is getting us from point A to point B, sort of thing.
Would you agree that it's kind of not trying to be anything other than looking and sounding lovely, I guess?
Yeah, I think it's just kind of like the perfect escapism for the time, definitely.
So we'll move on to the critical reception in a moment, but before we do, Alice, I believe you got a little something for us.
Yes, indeed, Josh. Follow me now, and listeners, down the rabbit hole, ready for this bit that I like to call Alice Down the Rabbit Hole. So, in the credits of Meet Me in St. Louis, which are at the beginning of the film, I noticed that one of the cast members was called Chill Wills. So I had to find out more about this guy to find out just how chill Wills might be. Turns out, not that chill. Theodore Childress Wills was born on the hottest day of the year in 1902 and went by the name Chill as an ironic reference to that fact. Like with many actors we've discussed over the past few weeks, Chill started off in a boy band that he formed called the Avalon Boys. The band disbanded in 1938 and Chill focused on his acting career that would span decades, starring alongside Elizabeth Taylor and James Dean. But perhaps his most famous role was in 1960 as beekeeper in John Wayne's The Alamo. The film missed the mark with some critics, except for Chill's performance that earned him an Oscar nomination for Best Supporting Actor. At 58, this could have been his final chance to nab the award, and so he went in hard. And what followed is what has been described as the worst promotional campaign in Oscar history. What have been called desperate, tasteless and offensive ads started appearing in newspapers pushing for Chill to be awarded the honour. The transparency and arrogance of the ads had the total opposite of the desired effect. John Wayne tried to distance himself from the actor, saying that neither he nor the Alamo cast and crew had any part in the cheap publicity stunts. On Oscar night, Bob Hope drew attention to Chill's efforts, saying, "I didn't know there was any campaigning until I saw my maid wearing a Chill Wills button." Despite 7 nominations, the Alamo scooped just 1 award for Best Sound, and that was Alice Down the Rabbit Hole.
It's really weird to think of someone in a boy band in the 30s.
Well, so it was called Musical Group, but I was like, I took from that. It's like, yeah, Backstreet Boys could be a musical group too.
I thought you meant their name was Musical Group. Like, good evening, we are Musical Group, and this is First Song. Okay, so we will move on to talking about the critical reception. So I'm intrigued because I've got it in front of me. How do you think it did? Just in general, how did you think it did?
In general, I mean, I imagine it scored quite high because I think people do hold it in quite high regard, and it's quite iconic to many people, even though I'd never seen it and I wasn't really familiar with it. And sort of when you think about other films that were maybe coming out at the time as well, and how can you rate a film that came out in 2019 against a film that came out in 1944? It's very strange, isn't it? But I think overall it is enjoyable, and the songs were just really, really great. I think a real highlight for me. I reckon people would have given it a pretty high score, like maybe an 8.5 or like late 8s, maybe.
Yeah, so it's interesting actually. So on IMDb, it gets 7.6 out of 10.
Oh, really? Oh, that surprises me.
But on Rotten Tomatoes, it gets 87% from the audience. However, a first for just films and that, it gets 100% on the critics' tomato meter.
Wow. 100.
So that being said, bearing in mind we're kind of talking about critical reception rather than audience score, I suppose. I mean, we take everything into account, but taking that into account, is it underrated? Can it be underrated if it's 100%?
No.
So it's almost
not underrated. Well, the 7, I thought the 7 score on the IMDb page, maybe that was a little bit mean, but no, 100%. That's unheard of.
Almost by definition, we have to say it's overrated because nothing's 100%.
No, of course. Not even Terminator 2, and I know that's shocking.
Exactly.
So overrated.
Well, let's say this. Okay, so it might not be 100%. We picked it because it's a classic film, so we didn't pick it because it's underseen or underrated. Did it live up to expectations for you?
Sure, yeah. Like it was what I would expect a film from that time period to kind of look like and be about, and and that sort of thing. I think it did. Like I didn't feel disappointed in any way. Well, did you feel that? How did you?
No, I'm the same as you. I wouldn't be in like a huge rush to watch it again, but I enjoyed it. It was warm. It was charming. It looked amazing. I can definitely see why it's become a classic, and I definitely see why it's become a family classic. A lot of people, I think, would consider this almost like a kind of It's a Wonderful Life type, watch it on Christmas Eve type film. So I can definitely see why it's a classic, but I can't say it's underrated because it was 100%, but I can see why it's a classic. So we picked it because it's a classic film. We can see why it's a classic, so we'll call it appropriately rated, kind of.
Wow, no, it's got to go in the overrated pile, right? It's got to.
I tell you what, let's say this. Does it deserve to be a classic film?
I would say so, yeah.
So let's say it's deserving of its status.
Yes, absolutely. Mimi and St. Louis, deserving of its status. I bet that's the review we always wanted.
So there we go. Our first classic film, and in a new category, deserves to be a classic film, shall we say?
Oh, certainly. Agreed. Josh, what are we watching next week?
So next week, we're going to go for a slightly different flavour from Meet Me in St. Louis. We're going to be watching The Losers.
Okay. Oh,
which
I'm
is
not familiar with that, I don't
It's
think.
got it's from 2010, and it's a kind of adaptation of a comic book film. And I will say no more than that. So I'll be interested to see what you think of that next week. Yeah, so get in touch. We'd love to hear from you. Let us know what you think of any of the films we've done so far, really. It's filmsandthatpod@gmail.com. Do get in touch if you've got a film you'd like us to do, or any other general questions. If you've got a random question for the beginning, we'd just like to hear from you. As I say, filmsandthatpod@gmail.com. The Twitter's @films_that, and Facebook and Instagram is filmsandthatpod. Alice, thank you as ever for joining us on the first classic episode.
Thank you very much, Josh.
And we'll see you next week. It's goodbye from me. Cheerio.
Bye.